Call this my lawyer's confession. I put on red lipstick like armor that day, and then I walked into a room full of people who had rehearsed my defeat. The auction house smelled like old wood and fresh coffee, a strange combo that made my throat tighten every time the gavel hit the block. Outside, wind pushed the city's late autumn dust across the square. Inside, the Morete mansion sat on the catalog page like a photograph of someone else's life. Columns, carved stone, a staircase that folded like a question at the center of it all. I had studied properties before, not as a collector, but as a strategist. As a lawyer, I learned to see leverage where others saw only ornamentation. As a founder, I learned to see potential where others saw expense. That morning, these two ways of thinking braided together. My family came to the auction as if it were a theater production, and they'd all been cast as critics. My mother, etiquette sharp enough to cut through the room, smiled in that way that seeks applause from strangers by shredding you. My father was there with the proudly passive expression men like to wear when they want to seem above details. Lucas, my brother, leaned back in his seat with crossed arms, the picture of someone already inside his favorite joke. Aunt Claudia, bless her, had taken it upon herself to be loud. Buying a mansion, she'd scoffed earlier over a shared coffee, for a cosmetics brand? Darling, even my neighbor's dog knows better investments. They laughed at me like we were in some private sketch where I was the punchline. I could feel the laughter like a physical thing, warmth on my skin, pressure behind my jaw. That's the thing about ridicule. It shrinks you in public and stretches you thin in private. I'd spent years learning to hold my dignity when the world practiced elbowing me sideways. I didn't go to that auction to prove them wrong. I went because the Morete house was the hinge my brand needed, and buying it would force the world to treat us like a player, not a hobby. But I admit, there was also a small private satisfaction in standing where they expected me to flinch. When the catalog number for the Morete mansion flashed, the room folded into a new, quieter attention. The auctioneer spoke in that rhythm practiced by men who sell dreams and antique mirrors. Bids rose like tide marks on a ledger, measured, clinical. People waved paddles. Phones glinted. The paddle number swung past polite curiosity into something serious. My pulse slowed and did a curious thing. Instead of racing with panic, it matched the cadence of the auctioneer. Lawyers develop a certain appetite for process. When you've negotiated contracts and deadlines, you learn to like the rhythm of escalation. I found myself counting in my head, the range, the likely high point, and the people who would drop out first. My hand was steady when I raised my own paddle. I could almost hear my mother's intake of breath behind me. The room noticed. My action was small, but it rewired the atmosphere. People looked up from their devices. The paddle numbers climbed. Bids came back at me, then retreated. Then, shockingly, a pause, like the whole room was collectively choosing whether to step into the water. When the gavel finally fell, there was a sound like a small thunderclap. And in the minutes that followed, silence did something I hadn't expected. It applauded me. Not the wild acclaim of people who had believed in me from the start, but that stunned quiet that comes after someone rearranges a story everyone thought they already knew. My mother's face shifted from amusement to something thin and private. Lucas's smirk thinned into a question mark. Aunt Claudia was silent long enough for the servers to clear a tray beside her. The auctioneer announced the name. Ownership had a surprising legal clarity to it. No debates, no appeals. The parchment of the contract folded abstractly into ink and date. People moved around me like currents. Some were curious, others annoyed, a few excited. I kept my red lipstick. I kept my composure. The truth is, the public act of raising that paddle was less an outburst than a long, patient negotiation. I had run the numbers in my head for months. I had imagined possible counterbids and exit strategies. I had made sure there would be no scene I couldn't step out of. That's the confession. It was part instinct, part calculation, and entirely a decision to stop letting other people narrate my limits. The immediate aftermath was quiet in the earshot sense, but loud in other places. There were group messages that pinged like small stones dropped into my pocket. Friends' congratulations, skeptical emojis, and then the family thread, which at first simmered with disbelief and then turned into something more direct. My phone became a small theater of reactions. Mother sent a string of question marks. Father texted a brief, "Are you sure?" which was simply his way of saying he didn't want to be asked to take sides. Lucas sent a message that read, "So you bought it? Seriously?" Aunt Claudia texted a photo of an op-ed clip with the caption, "Well, at least you'll have somewhere to put your lipsticks." Then the press arrived. A local TV crew turned up at the mansion steps like bees following a new bloom. Someone wrote a short piece about a female entrepreneur turning a historic property into a headquarters. The headline was softer than I wanted, but it opened doors. "Founder buys Morete mansion," read one line. Sales that week nudged upward, then leapt like someone had turned a dial. That surge wasn't magic, it was visibility. People buy into stories. They buy into the idea that someone who looks like they worked for it actually did. It was a predictable effect of a predictable truth. Visibility creates opportunity. If you love comeback stories, hit subscribe. I'll wait. There are 3 reasons I asked that paddle to be raised in public: to secure space for the brand, to control the narrative about who I was and what I could do, and to test myself. Not to humiliate my family, not to crow. To move the conversation from "did she ever" to "watch her." Renovating the Morete mansion became a slow, stubborn documentary of choices. It was easy to imagine a dramatic makeover: chandeliers for missing light, polished marble corridors bathed in soft gold. The practical reality was less cinematic and more administrative. Permits, 1,000 decisions about HVAC and surfaces, architects who spoke in precise, patient lines. My team arrived like a small army of believers with spreadsheets and tape measures. We opened boxes the size of small fortunes, prototypes, packaging samples, scent strips that smelled like a future I wanted to design. The marble floors that once echoed parties now contained boxes stacked like unbuilt chapters. I found it comforting to move from theory to action. The law had taught me to prepare. Entrepreneurship taught me to execute. We built the headquarters not as a shrine to my victory, but as a workshop for what the brand could become. The old ballrooms became creative labs. The guest rooms became photo studios. And the basement, which once held a wine cellar, now stored finished products ready for shipment. We installed a small plaque near the main entrance with a statement meant to feel like a credo rather than a boast. "We build beauty that lasts." I had the plaque translated and put in a plain, modest font. It felt right that the words were simple. Media days were new territory. A handful of segments ran where I explained that the decision to center the business in a historic property was about heritage and visibility. Interviewers asked the question that everyone wanted to ask. Was it personal? Did you do it to prove a point to your family? I didn't dodge it. "No," I said. "I did it to build a home for our work." But the cameras caught the glint in my eye, which was part stubbornness, part delight. There is power in owning your narrative, and there is even more in refusing to lower your voice when the world wants you quiet. Family visits to the mansion came with a particular soundtrack of awkwardness. They walked the marble and touched the banisters like people visiting an exhibit. My mother inspected the kitchen cabinets and declared them acceptable. Father found the lighting to be too bright and insisted it gave the house a store feeling. Lucas wanted to know who would run the social media and whether we could get a discount on product. Aunt Claudia sampled a lipstick and announced it made her teeth look nice. I watched them through a lens that had once been tender and was now analytical. I saw not enemies, but people who had never imagined how a different choice would look in the living room of their life. At the first family gathering we held at the mansion, an intentionally small dinner with the family and a couple of local journalists, I did something that later people called theatrical. I played a 30-second clip from the auction. The paddle rise, the gavel, the stunned faces. I played it not to rub it in, but to create a shared memory of the moment without sifting it through gossip. The room reacted in that mix of embarrassment and amusement that families always manage. My mother's smile was a little brittle. Father's hands folded differently. Lucas tried to be flippant and instead sounded like a teenager pretending to be bored. Aunt Claudia laughed loudly to fill the quiet. When the clip ended, I spoke. I said, simply, "This house isn't about proving you wrong. It's about proving to myself that I could build something that could outlast our doubts." I invited them, publicly, to be part of the project in practical ways: short-term roles on campaigns, a space for occasional events, a discounted product allowance. No special treatment, just work with clear responsibilities and accountability. There was a pause, then a smattering of applause from the journalists, a laugh from Aunt Claudia, and a hesitant nod from Mother. I will admit I had expected anger. I had prepared for a scene. What I hadn't prepared for was the quiet, practical relief that sometimes comes when a family is offered a handle to carry their pride on their own. Not everything healed overnight. Lucas, within months, called me in genuine distress. He had lost a job in construction after a company downsized, the kind of sudden gap that eats routine from the inside out. He was embarrassed to ask. He thought I would say no. I think he expected that I would say no. I remembered being younger, hungry, and too proud to take help. I told him two things. First, that I would not bail him out with a check. Checks make drama and dependency. Second, that I had a job opening that matched his skills. Project assistant for the renovation teams, responsible for logistics and site coordination. It was honest work. It came with a clear job description, shift hours, and the kind of routine that patches a person back into day-to-day functionality. He accepted, clumsy and proud and relieved. What happened next was the thing that still surprises me when I think about it. Being an employer of your family complicates everything, but it also can become a bridge. Lucas learned to use a punch clock. He learned to translate his practical skills into a record of work. Mother called more often now, sometimes to ask for technical advice about a campaign, sometimes just to have someone to tell about the neighbor's cat. She was still critical, but her voice held a new thread: curiosity. We were learning new languages for each other. I learned to separate gratitude from obligation. She learned that praise could be given in other forms than the ones she knew. Meanwhile, the business grew in measured, believable ways. Sales figures rose, not like a lottery, but like a well-watered plant. We invested in product quality, in packaging that said something about care, and in stories that connected. A small PR push led to an unexpected international contact. A buyer from a European retailer who had seen a piece on a morning show and thought our story might resonate with their market. There is a peculiar, heady crossing when a local purchase becomes a passport. A couple of months later, I found myself in Paris, backstage at an industry expo, the kind of place that turns regional names into lines on an export agreement. Paris was the most surreal punctuation to a chapter I'd been writing for years. Backstage, under fluorescent lights and behind a curtain of silk, I felt the same steadiness I had at the auction, only multiplied. My legal training had taught me to present calmly. My experience running a business had taught me to speak plainly. I delivered a talk about persistence, about purpose, and about building platforms that give people room to do their best work. In the audience were buyers, a few journalists, and a handful of people whose lives we had already touched with our products. A European retailer made an offer to partner for a line that respected our formulations. No cheapening or discounting, just a respectful, scale-minded collaboration. When I walked off stage, a woman hugged me and said, "We've been waiting for someone with both vision and backbone." It struck me as odd modesty that felt, in that second, like validation. The network calls and emails that followed were not about revenge or spectacle. They were about product placement, distribution logistics, and mutual benefit. I remember sitting in a small cafe in Paris afterward, the city lights soft as if the world itself had leaned back and allowed me a moment of satisfaction that wasn't noisy. I had wanted that for my company and for myself, to be taken seriously where decisions mattered. There is a temptation to narrate this arc as a swift moral of victory. Raise the paddle and the world will open its doors. The real confession is messier. I was not acting out of vengeance. I was not chasing headlines. I was exercising a kind of strategic patience. I wanted a stage large enough for my work. I wanted a place that would force people to see us the way we saw ourselves, as a serious business with craft, story, and an audience. I also wanted to see how courageous I could be when nobody was handing me permission. In time, people started telling their versions of the story. Some called it a publicity stunt, others a masterclass in branding. I don't mind the varied interpretations. The important part is that the action, the work that followed the bid, was real. Teams did the design iterations, chemists tested formulations, customer service answered questions. We put in the hours that always follow any headline. Headlines will give you minutes of attention. Product will give you months and years of loyalty if you keep your promises. The family's stance softened in increments. Mother, who had been the most vocal skeptic, came to an event where we launched a campaign aimed at supporting women starting small businesses. She listened as I spoke about access and dignity and how a professional identity can be a scaffold for a life. Afterwards, she came up and took my hand, awkwardly, like someone unused to public affection, and said, "I never thought you'd be the one to make a house into something like this." It felt like a minor miracle, a concession of possibility. Lucas, now a steady presence at the mansion, began to understand the peculiar pride of being part of something you helped build. Aunt Claudia still offered stern opinions about marketing choices, but she also started recommending our products to neighbors, with a flourish that suggested personal investment. There were offers that surprised me: an investor who wanted to photocopy my model for another venture, a mentor who suggested franchising. I listened politely, quiz-faced and patient. Legal training teaches you to listen for the holes in an offer. Entrepreneurship teaches you to look for the ways an opportunity fits your long game. I turned down flashy propositions and accepted a measured partnership from a retailer who shared our values about formulation and transparency. That choice led to more distribution, not lightning fame, but a sustainable pathway to growth. I prefer the latter. As a lawyer, I learned to spot attractive traps. As a founder, I learned to prefer slow, credible roads. At some point, a documentary filmmaker approached us. She wanted to tell the story of a daughter who turned contempt into a company. Her questions were kind but relentless. Was the auction about proving them wrong? She asked. I answered truthfully. It was about taking my place. Did you enjoy their discomfort? She asked, a little sharper. I said no. That answer surprised people. The truth is, I did not want discomfort to be my sport. I wanted to create a space where my vision could live. The family's reactions were collateral, not the objective. There is a lesson in how I handled Lucas, one of the most important parts of this confession. When a loved one asks for help, it is tempting to measure the price of generosity in dramatic gestures or financial largesse. I wanted, instead, to offer accountability and dignity. Giving someone a job and setting expectations restores their authority over their own life, arguably more than an anonymous check can. It is not magnanimous as a spectacle, it is practical and humane in the long term. Lucas's progress isn't a tidy redemption arc. He still stumbles, forgets details, swears too loudly in client meetings sometimes. But he shows up, and that is what matters. The public narrative eventually shifted from "did she" to "she did." That shift was not instantaneous. It was the slow accumulation of customer reviews, of consistent product quality, of open doors for distributors and partners who appreciated the integrity of what we were building. My confession is not that I engineered the auction to shock people. My confession is that I chose an unmistakable action to make a subtle point. If you want to change the story people tell about you, sometimes you must change the setting. When reconciliation came, it did so in small gestures. My mother brought over a casserole for a lunch party once, an old-fashioned thing, not exactly glamorous, and left reluctantly with a box of product samples. Lucas brought friends to help with the shipping day and stayed to learn how to respond to customer service emails. Aunt Claudia called to recommend a boutique owner to us, saying she likes full-bodied colors. Each step was small and real. They weren't shouting apologies or writing op-eds. They were doing the things people do when they move from criticism to curiosity. On the quiet nights, I would walk the mansion steps after everyone had left. The porch became a place to listen. I would stand there, sometimes with a cup of tea, sometimes simply with my thoughts. Time has a way of folding when you give it purpose. I found a new kind of peace, not in proving anyone wrong, but in proving to myself that I could keep commitments, to my team, to my customers, and to the version of me that had grown quieter and firmer with age. Now, the confession. Why make such a public move? Because some things only become real when others are forced to notice them. As a lawyer, I learned how to create leverage and to make arguments that stick. As a founder, I learned that stories matter and that deciding to occupy space can be a legitimate strategy. I raised my paddle to put the brand where it would be seen and taken seriously. I raised it to test myself. I raised it because I wanted a platform to do work that mattered, not because I wanted to inflict pain. I will not pretend it was all noble. There were moments of vindictive delight, small human reactions when a critic was caught off guard. There were texts I sent at 3 in the morning that read like a gloating private diary. And yet, the more enduring feeling was not triumph. It was responsibility. Owning a mansion in that sense felt less like winning a chess match and more like agreeing to host a party you intend to keep the lights on for. People sometimes ask whether I regret making the auction a spectacle. My answer is nuanced. I don't regret the public nature of it because that publicity was the lever to get us into rooms that mattered. I do not regret the decision to invite my family into my life's architecture. That's how the bridges formed. But I learned to separate the personal from the performative. When the cameras were gone, when the echo of that gavel faded, there was work to be done. Formulas to perfect, teams to train, systems to install. Those parts were less glamorous, but they are the durable ones. If you ever find yourself on the edge between a small life and one that requires you to be visible, you will face an odd decision. You can stay small and comfortable, or you can step into visibility and accept a new registry of expectations. There is fear in that decision. There is also an undeniable freedom. Once you decide to be seen, you can shape what people see. That was the calculation behind my paddle. It was not a stunt. It was a strategic move to move the story. We did good work in Paris. We did better work in the studio. We built partnerships that respected our identity. We created jobs that paid people at rates I was proud to approve. We made products that hundreds of customers trusted enough to order again and again. The Morete mansion became less the trophy the tabloids wanted, and more the everyday stage where the brand lived. Its marble floors heard the clatter of packing tape and the hushed planning of product launches. The grand rooms hosted focus groups where women, diverse ages and backgrounds, spoke honestly about what they wanted from skincare and cosmetics. Those conversations mattered more to me than any headline. Once, as the sun set and the house softened into gold, my mother stood beside me on the balcony. She did not offer a grand apology. Those are rarer than people assume. But she did say, quietly, "I hadn't understood what you were trying to do." That was the closest thing to a peace treaty I could imagine. I told her then the thing I've said to myself 100 times since. It wasn't about being right. It was about building right. This is my lawyer's confession. I raised that paddle because I was tired of letting other people define the borders of my life. I wanted not revenge, but repair, not spectacle, but space. I wanted to show my team that I would stake my reputation where our work would be made and exhibited. I wanted to give my customers a physical address that promised longevity. I wanted to ask more of myself, and I wanted a place big enough to hold the answers. Some nights, people still ask what it felt like to sit through the auction and watch the room shift. The truest thing is still the silence after the gavel, an ocean of attention settling in. Silence is its own kind of applause. The best silence is not the one that stings. It is the one that allows the next sound, steady work, honest conversation, slow growth, to begin. If this story moved you, like and subscribe. If you want to know more about how we built the Creative HQ or see behind the scenes of the renovation and product development, check the description for links. I believe that owning your narrative is an act of courage. And maybe, if this confession has taught me anything, it's that courage is less about loud triumph and more about sustained, careful action. The lipstick was indeed my armor. Time turned out to be my best argument.